everybody, it's Emily at Arg Schooling, and today we're going to do my third Things I Love in Books video. So in this series, I've been talking about things that I love in books and then giving you examples and recommendations based on those things that I love. So in today's video, I'm going to try to do 4. We're going to kick it off with I really love stories where people are learning about their family history, or they're like learning about somebody else's family history, or like a thing about that person's past, if that makes sense. So some examples of this. I loved The Summer of Lost Letters by Hannah Reynolds, and I think this is the book too that like made this click in my head, like, oh my god, this is the thing I love. Because that on paper is not a book that should have worked for me. It is a YA romance, and I read it on a whim and ended up absolutely loving it and giving it 5 stars. So this is a story about a girl whose grandmother recently had died, and she left behind some letters and a bit of a mystery about where she came from. All that her family knew was that she had come to America at the like early stages of World War II and was taken in by a family. And she'd never talked about any of this. So like they're unraveling this mystery. There's a whole romance thing happening, and that was fine. But what I loved about the story was like the way they were researching and talking to people and like unraveling the story of her grandmother's life and how she came to live in this place and like the people that took her in and that kind of thing. So I loved it. And another book that is a good example of this is The Postcard by Anne Berest. We read this for book club this year and I loved it so much. This is a story about again unraveling that family history, and like you might know certain things, but you don't know the details about those things. So they're digging deeper to understand like what happened, who were these people and what happened to them. And it is about the smallness of like these individual lives and how they made this big impression overall on this person's current life. And I just cannot say enough good things about this book anyway. Like, it's a brilliant piece of nonfiction. It's sort of a memoir, but also it's more like a memoir about a family. And it's just extremely well done. A history of like what happened to this person's whole family during World War II and how that affected their lives going forward. It's an interesting look at like generational trauma too. So just excellent, excellent work. For something a little bit different, I would say Displacement by Kiku Hughes is another really good example of this, where this is a graphic novel and it's about a girl who keeps getting like pulled back in time, and each time it happens, she meets her grandmother in a Japanese internment camp. So again, this is kind of like that whole like generational trauma thing, where you have a person who is experiencing this weird trauma, but they're experiencing it because of their grandmother's trauma. And like she discovers too later on, like it's also happening to her mother. And so like it's such an interesting perspective on generational trauma and like how that can affect people, but also about like starting to understand why they have that trauma in the first place. And then the other book that I wanted to mention here, because it's so different from the 3 I just talked about, is The How and the Why by Cynthia Hand. I read this years ago and I still think about it sometimes. This is a book about a girl who was adopted, and she's learning about her birth mother. And the story is split between her perspective and what her life looks like, and as she's starting to learn more about where she came from, but also her birth mother and her story and why she chose to give her baby up for adoption. And so you're seeing these two girls and their experiences in life and how they sort of come together. It's really beautiful. I loved this story, and I loved the characters in it so much that I was sad when I finished it because I wanted more. I think this is YA, and it's an author that I need to read more of because everything I've read by Cynthia Hand has been just absolutely fantastic. Like, her writing is really, really good, and her stories are also really interesting. Another thing I love in books is one that's hard to explain, but it's secret identities, but also like specifically girls dressing up as boys to disguise themselves and be able to do things that they otherwise could not do. So, some examples of that. The first one I want to talk about is Wolf by Ryan Groudon, and it is not a girl disguising herself as a boy, but it is a weird, like, secret identity situation that, like, this is a story set in an alternate universe in which Germany and Japan won World War II. And they have this, like, motorcycle contest every year throughout, like, the lands that they have won through conquest. And the prize is getting to meet Adolf Hitler and shake his hand. Like, that's the setup for the story. But we're following our main character, who is a Jewish girl who is one of the very few survivors of the concentration camps, and she was experimented on. And so she's a shapeshifter, and so she's able to take on any identity and disguise herself. And her goal in the story is to enter the race, win, and then assassinate Hitler. That's the whole book. Like, that's the setup. And it's so good. Like, this is one of my favorite duologies of all time. It is so well done, so interesting, so edge of your seat. And I loved, like, this whole setup of her being able to take on different identities and disguise herself seamlessly so that nobody would know. It's just a really fun story. Okay, now, girls disguising themselves as boys. The first book I want to recommend here is Gold Mountain by Betty G. Yee. I read this last year, and it was so good. This is a story about a girl who lives in China, and her family has become destitute. Her brother, I think, dies early on, and her father's in jail, and she's left to kind of figure out how to fix this. And so she takes the ticket her brother was meant to use to go to America and work on the Transcontinental Railroad so he could send them back money. So she's decided that's what she's going to do. She's going to dress up as her brother, go to America, work on the railroad, send back money, and get her father out of jail. And that's the setup for the whole book. And it is so much fun. I had such a good time reading this and like, one, learning more about what happened with different workers on the Transcontinental Railroad and like all the like people trying to sabotage everything because like different companies wanted to be able to take power, but also the whole like girl dressing up as a boy and proving to herself that she's capable, that she can do things. Like, she's able to maintain this job that is incredibly challenging and keep her disguise hidden. And it's just a really fun story. I really liked it. And of course I have to talk about Anatomy, a Love Story by Danish. Is this going to show up in every category? Damn near. This is a perfect example because it's a girl dressing up as a boy to go to school and study anatomy and learn how to become a surgeon. Like, that's not the entire book. She's dressed as herself most of the story, but there is an element of that in the plot. So I have to use that here too. And then the last book I want to talk about is, I think, A Clash of Kings is when it starts happening in the Game of Thrones stories, the Song of Ice and Fire. I'm pretty sure A Clash of Kings is where Arya starts taking on the role of Ari, and she cuts her hair off and dresses as a boy, and she's on her way to the Wall to like get away from King's Landing. And I love Arya's character anyway. She's my favorite character in A Song of Ice and Fire, but I especially loved this whole plot line of her like trying to be a boy, trying to fit in. Like, she's always been a tomboy. She's always felt more like a boy than a girl anyway, so it should be easy enough, but it turns out to be a little harder than she anticipated to maintain her disguise. And I just think that that's one of my favorite storylines in the entire Song of Ice and Fire series. Okay, next thing I love in books is books that are about movies and TV. This is another category that I kind of just discovered that I really enjoy. And it really hit me when I read You Couldn't Ignore Me If You Tried by Susanna Gora. This is specifically about John Hughes and his movies and how they like affected an entire generation of people. And he kind of created teen movies. And I love John Hughes movies. They're some of my top favorite movies of all time. So I was really excited to read this, and it was just a really good time. I don't know. It made me feel so much nostalgia. It made me want to rewatch every single John Hughes movie. It was excellent. And if you are a fan of John Hughes, I think you would probably enjoy this book. Then I read No Crying in Baseball by Erin Carlson, and this is all about A League of Their Own, the movie. And this was good, not as good as You Couldn't Ignore Me If You Tried, but it was still really good because, again, one of my very favorite movies of all time. Really enjoyed the TV series, and I'm really, really mad that they canceled it because it was so freaking good. But this book was a really interesting look at like Penny Marshall's career, more so than A League of Their Own. But I mean, obviously there was a lot to do with A League of Their Own because this is all about like her career trajectory leading up to her making this movie. But it was a really interesting book, and I did enjoy it. I also have to talk about It Came from the Closet. This is Queer Reflections on Horror, edited by Joe Valise, and it's like a whole variety of different authors and their reflections on horror. And I really loved this. I love when people dissect a horror movie or like talk about like what spoke to them the most about it. One of my favorite things to watch it during like the Halloween season, besides like all of my favorite horror movies, is documentaries about horror. And like there have been some really interesting ones that I've seen where they like just take like a topic from like horror genres and then explore different movies within that genre. I love that kind of thing. And so that's kind of what this book is. This is specifically like looking at horror movies through a queer lens and like how maybe a certain movie helped somebody to come out, or how a movie like affected them growing up and that sort of thing. So it was really interesting. And if you're a horror fan, and I think this book would be something you would enjoy. And for something that wasn't nonfiction, because I think all of those were, Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay was one of my favorite books of the year this year. And it is specifically about the making of a horror movie. And I found this to be such an interesting storytelling device where you have like almost like a documentary happening in this book where he's talking about the making of the movie and how this character, this person who played this specific character was affected by it. Like there were elements of this that, especially with the audiobook, were literally like listening to a table reading. And it was so interesting. And I want more things like that. I want to find more books that are stories about the making of a movie or that kind of thing going forward, because that was something that I knew I would enjoy, but I didn't realize how much I would enjoy. And then the last one I want to mention is similar to that in that it's about movies, but it's fiction, and that is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. It's another one I read a few years ago, and I really want more things like that, where it's about like the golden age of Hollywood, and we're following like a character who had a hidden life, but like had all these different like experiences, and we're following like the trajectory of her career from like how she got started in movies to like how her career blossomed and then maybe fell apart and that kind of thing. So I really enjoyed that a lot, and I want more things like that too. And the last category has the fewest entries in it because I need to find more things. I need more things like this. And that is books with really interesting narration styles. And obviously this is inspired by my absolute love and devotion to The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. That this is the book that I was like, oh my god, I need more things like this. Because having a story narrated by Death and getting Death's perspective on everything that's happening was just so incredibly amazing. Like, I loved that. And I wanted more things like that. And so that is the inspiration for, like, why I love this kind of thing. And I've also been able to find that in Lovely War by Julie Berry, which is narrated by the Greek pantheon. And, like, they're having, like, this almost like a debate over something. It's been too long since I read this. I don't remember what the debate was about, but we're like arguing over these two gods and why they're upset with each other, and like they're having all the other gods weigh in, and meanwhile they're also narrating the story of these people's lives on Earth and like how they are influencing their lives. And it's so good. Like, if you love historical fiction, if you love interesting narration, if you love Greek mythology, this book is perfection, and you should read it. And then the last book in this category, because I need more things, so recommend me titles down below. If you know of books that have really interesting narration, I need to know. But the last book I want to talk about is Thistle Foot by Jenna Rose Nethercott. And this one almost barely makes it into this category because really it's only for certain chapters. But the chapters that are told from the perspective of the house with chicken legs are my favorite parts of this entire book. Like, I wish the whole book was narrated by the house, but the chapters that are absolutely perfection. And so having the house be able to narrate its own story and like tell it throughout the course of the book it made it a 5-star for me, honestly. I think if it didn't have those chapters, this would have been like a 3, maybe a 4-star, but with the chapters told from the house's perspective, made this book a 5-star read for me. And like, I want more things like that. So if you know of some books that have really interesting, unique narration styles, please share them down in the comments because I am on a search. I want things like that. I feel like it's missing from my life. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know down below in the comments if you have book recommendations for any of these categories. I would love to hear them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Happy reading. Bye!